Ever get that feeling? Like a chill, Like something's just not right. Well, imagine living with that feeling for years. Knowing the person who murdered your mother could walk free. That's Amy's reality. And even worse, he's threatened her life, even from behind bars.
It's a lot to carry, that kind of fear.
It is. Today, we're diving deep into Amy's story. She's fighting for peace of mind, something most of us take for granted. We're using Amy's own words, shared on the What Came Next podcast.
What gets me is, the weight of it all. Not just losing her mom in such a horrific way, but the constant fear. Knowing the threat's still there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It doesn't end when the perpetrator's locked up.
Right. It's a stark reminder of that.
It really is. And it's chilling to hear what happened at Jesse's, her brother's, parole hearing. He threatened Amy's life right there. Even repeated her address out loud.
And the prison system, they just brushed it off at first like it wasn't a big deal.
It's like they're not even speaking the same language.
Yeah, you've got bureaucratic procedures on one side and raw fear on the other.
Exactly. She even described him making threatening gestures during the whole thing, just adding to the menace.
And still, it wasn't enough for them. This disconnect between the rules and the reality victims face, it's a big problem.
It makes you think, how many other victims have been ignored? Just because their fear doesn't fit some neat little box.
Right. How many?
It's a scary thought. But there's a twist, a bit of hope in Amy's case. Jesse got hit with new charges. He attacked a correctional officer with a makeshift weapon.
That was huge. Suddenly there's a new legal angle, a way to maybe keep him locked up.
So it's not just about adding time for the assault.
Right. It shifts the focus. He's not just a past threat. He's actively dangerous. Harder to argue for release when you're acting violent in prison.
It's like the system finally saw him for who he is.
Exactly.
And now it's a race against time. Amy and the DA are trying to get a conviction on these new charges before he's up for parole on the murder.
High stakes. Incredibly high. It's not just punishment for the assault. It's about protecting Amy and her family. If he gets out, who knows what could happen.
A legal chess match, basically. Each move is critical.
Exactly.
Then comes sentencing day. Amy described it as an emotional roller coaster. The whole courtroom felt hostile, like on top of everything else, she's got to deal with that atmosphere.
That environment, it takes a toll. You're supposed to be calm, stoic even, but you're facing your mother's murderer.
It's unreal. It makes you wonder, does the justice system even consider the human cost? All that trauma just piled on.
It's a good question, a really important one.
Then there's Jesse in the courtroom, adding another layer to it all. He tried to control things, refused a lawyer, tried to plead guilty, just wanted to get sent back to prison quickly.
Classic manipulation. Even in court, he's trying to silence Amy, deny her any agency. It's a reminder, Some people just crave power, remorse, accountability, not a chance.
It's disturbing, but not surprising, sadly. But she got her chance. She made a victim impact statement. And those words, they carry weight, legally, and for Amy's own healing, I think.
Those statements are so powerful. Victims reclaim their narrative. They speak directly to the court, to the perpetrator. It's about the lasting effects of the crime.
It's a moment to be heard, to be seen as more than just a case.
Right. It's a chance to say, I'm here, this is what happened to me, this is how it affected me.
Exactly. And Amy, she embraced that fully. She confronted Jesse about his past abuse, shared how her community supported her, emphasized how one person's actions can ripple out, hurting so many.
It's remarkable, her composure. He tried to interrupt to talk over her, but she wouldn't be silenced.
It really is. And you know what?
Yeah.
The judge made a decision that nobody expected.
Oh, tell me more about that. It was almost as if the system itself was working against her in some ways. Like, take the courtroom where the sentencing took place. It was a courtroom specifically for, prison crimes. Cases involving inmates, correctional officers, that sort of thing.
So victims like Amy, family of those harmed by inmates, they wouldn't be the usual visitors to that space.
Exactly. The DA actually prepared Amy for this. He explained that the staff there were probably used to dealing with, a different kind of victim, someone directly involved in the prison system itself.
Ah, I see. So they were kind of operating in their own little bubble.
Yeah, pretty much. Which might explain, though it doesn't excuse the way Amy was treated. Imagine being told to be quiet, to just bottle up your emotions while you're facing your mother's murderer.
It's awful. It just shows how these biases, this lack of understanding trauma, can affect even the well-meaning systems. Victims end up feeling re-traumatized, like they don't matter.
Exactly. It's a good reminder that justice, it doesn't always equal healing. Luckily, Amy had a DA who really went the extra mile. He even managed to get Jesse put in administrative segregation to prevent him from, potentially hiring someone to harm Amy while he was in jail.
Wow. So he recognized the threat was real even from inside prison, and he took steps to protect her.
He did. He was committed to her safety. He understood that a guilty verdict, it wouldn't erase the fear, so he tried to create a safer environment for her.
He even fought for her to record the sentencing hearing, argued that it was important for her to have her own documentation, especially after those delays getting the transcript from the parole hearing.
That's so important, having that record, that proof.
Absolutely. It's about control, agency,
Yeah.
especially when you're dealing with a system that can feel so secretive.
You're right. It's not just about legal accuracy. It's about feeling like you have some power in this situation.
Sadly, the judge denied the request, said it would turn the whole thing into a hoopla. Kind of ironic considering Jesse's, tendency for outbursts.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Makes you wonder about, who gets to control the story in these settings? Should victims have a right to document their experience? Or does that power stay solely with the court?
It's a big question. And it feeds into that feeling that the system is more about protecting itself than the people it's supposed to serve. Then, just days before the sentencing, Amy gets another blow. She learns that her aunt, the one who's always supported Jesse, she's going to be there for the hearing.
Oh, man. That must have been so hard. It's a reminder of how complicated these family dynamics can be. To have someone side with the perpetrator, it can be incredibly isolating for the victim.
It shows how strong Amy is.
Yeah.
To handle the legal stuff and this emotional minefield, too. It's a lot. Thankfully, she had her friend Tiffany there, for support, especially since her other aunt, who's usually her rock, couldn't make it.
Having that support system makes all the difference. Someone who understands what you're going through.
It really does. And she needed it. Sentencing day was a wild ride, starting with Jesse's, legal maneuvering, I guess you could call it.
Yes. His initial plan to just plead guilty without a lawyer, remember? Trying to speed things up, get back to prison life.
Right? Well, seems like that backfired. The judge wouldn't allow it. Appointed him a lawyer to make sure he had proper representation.
Of course. Standard procedure, especially with serious charges. The court needs to ensure fairness for everyone.
But Jesse, always trying to control things, throws another curveball. He decides to plead no contest to all charges.
Interesting tactic. Basically, he's saying the state has enough to convict him without actually admitting guilt, avoids a trial, and limits what can be used against him later.
So more focused on getting back to his routine than actually taking responsibility.
Yeah, it's about avoiding accountability, not really grappling with the consequences of his actions, just focused on the practical stuff.
Disturbing, but not unexpected, right?
Yeah.
And then the ultimate manipulation. He tries to use Amy's victim impact statement as a bargaining chip. Says he'll retract his plea if she speaks.
Wow, talk about a power play. Trying to silence her, maintain that control. Classic abuser tactic. Even in court, it doesn't stop.
The judge shut that down, though. Made it clear that Amy had the right to speak. Jesse's objections didn't matter.
Good, that's how it should be. The court recognized her right to be heard, rejected his attempt to silence her.
A small victory, but an important one, right?
Yep.
So despite all his efforts, Jesse ends up pleading guilty to everything, including the death threats against Amy and her kids.
That's huge. The system finally acknowledges her fear, holds him accountable for those threats.
A long time coming, but it's there. Her experience is validated, her voice heard.
Exactly. But the journey wasn't over yet. She still had to deliver that statement. And with Jesse, who knows what would happen?
That's right. So what was it like when Amy stepped up to share her story? Well, before she could even start, Jesse just erupted, yelling, swearing, the whole thing. It was shocking.
No remorse, huh? Zero accountability. That outburst right there in court, it's a sign of, deep rage, complete lack of respect for the process, for Amy, for everything.
It was disturbing. And then, as Amy starts reading her statement, Jesse and his lawyer, they start talking amongst themselves like she wasn't even there, ignoring her completely.
Trying to make her feel small, invisible. Classic abuser tactic. Your words don't matter. You don't matter. That's the message they're sending.
It's awful. But Amy, she wouldn't be silenced. Every time they spoke, she paused, waited till they were quiet. She demanded that respect.
That's strength right there. Quiet defiance, not letting them control her, take away her moment.
It is. And then she does something incredibly brave. She talks about the abuse, the sexual abuse from Jesse when she was a child.
Wow, to say that out loud in court with him right there takes immense courage. It's about reclaiming her story, breaking the silence around abuse.
And it's a turning point, I think. Not just for the case, but for Amy herself. She's breaking free from that shame, that fear.
Absolutely. She's taking back control, saying, this happened, but it doesn't define me. It's powerful. And for other survivors, it's a reminder they're not alone.
She also talked about the petition she started to keep Jesse locked up. Thousands of people signed it. That's got to be a powerful feeling, knowing you're not alone in this.
Community, collective action, all those voices, united in support. It's a demand for justice. A reminder that even in the darkest times, there's strength in numbers.
She even shared some comments from the petition, showing how Jesse's actions hurt so many, not just her immediate family.
The ripples, right. Crime, it doesn't just affect the immediate victim. It spreads out, touches so many lives.
It really does. And Amy, she ended her statement talking about those ripple effects, the good and the bad. She talked about the DA, the judge, how they chose to act to help, and contrasted that with Jesse's choices and the devastation they caused.
Accountability and hope, too. She's acknowledging the harm, but she's also pointing to the possibility of good. People can choose a different path.
Exactly. Even in the darkness, there's hope. Healing is possible. But the question was, how would the judge respond? After years of fighting, what would the outcome be?
Well, the judge, she sentenced Jesse to 30 years to life for the attack on the correctional officer.
Wow, that's a serious sentence.
It is, and she added 6 years specifically for the threats against Amy and her kids.
So she acknowledged that fear, that very real threat.
She did. It validates Amy's experience, shows that those threats have consequences.
It's a big win for Amy. Her voice was heard, her safety mattered. But then, the judge did something nobody expected. She took away Jesse's youth offender status, retroactively.
Yeah, that was a surprise, a rare move, but in this case, the judge felt it was necessary.
So what does that mean for Jesse, practically speaking?
He's an adult offender now for his mother's murder. No more leniency. He could be in prison for the rest of his life.
That must have been an incredible moment for Amy. Knowing that threat, that constant fear of him getting out, it's gone.
She said it felt like a weight lifted. Years of anxiety, fear for her kids, it started to fade away.
It's hard to even imagine that kind of relief, to finally be free from that shadow.
It really is.
Amy's story, it's really powerful. She faced unimaginable loss and fear, but she found strength in her community, in herself, in fighting for justice.
It reminds us that even in a flawed system, there are people who fight for what's right, who advocate for the vulnerable.
And it's a story about empathy, about compassion. It's about a justice system that truly protects those who've been hurt. Because behind every case, there are human lives, stories of pain and resilience, loss and hope.
If you want to explore these themes further or learn more about the justice system and the impact of crime, be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive. We'll continue to bring you these insightful conversations about the human experience.
Until next time, remember, your voice matters. Your story deserves to be heard, and there's always hope, even when things seem darkest.